Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we have a special video prepared for you. Recently Alois and I worked together to create a fundamentals tier list. So pretty much we went through every fundamental that you need to know as a top laner and ranked it based on how important it is for you to improve upon it to get the most results in solo queue. We've coached a lot of students together in the TLA program and we truly believe the things that we ranked at the top of the list have given them the most results regardless of their rank. But a little bit of a spoiler alert, we didn't quite agree on everything at first, there were some heated discussions going on, so definitely a banger and I hope you enjoyed the video. How's it going everyone? Today we're going to be going through a fundamentals tier list, so of course I had to call in the big dog. Alois, thanks for joining me.
Yo, welcome guys. Awesome to be here, and of course when we're talking about fundamentals, it's just like, I feel like I'm summoned almost, so happy to be here.
Exactly. So our goal here is to kind of rank everything from most important to least important for the average player. So not just for high elo or low elo, anything like that. Trying to make it more general for what you want to be prioritizing for your improvement, because there are so many important fundamentals to learn in the game. So we're trying to help you simplify it and, you know, give you a top 3, top 5, and really help you lock in on that improvement.
Absolutely.
All right. So for the first one, base timings. From my point of view, I think this should go into S tier. Because I've seen so many students in a great position in lane, and they miss one back timer, their opponent TPs back to lane after a solo kill, and then they're just stuck suffering forever. So I feel like you can completely win or lose a lane off back timing, so for me it'd be S tier. But what do you think on that?
Absolutely. So I will say one of the biggest differences that I see between, let's say, a challenger top laner and a master top laner would be the mastering of their reset timers, and so the understanding of tempo. And the baseline concept of reset timers is that you want to recall whilst the wave is kind of pushing back towards you, right? So after a reset. But you can't always get those scenarios. There's a lot of tricky moments where you could perhaps recall in fog whilst your opponent is slow pushing towards you, so you didn't even get the crash. Or you have to min-max a recall after getting a kill because your opponent has TP. So base timings is one of the hardest ones, but by far one of the most important and rewarding ones to master, because if you recall correctly and actively play towards it, you're always going to be in a good spot.
Definitely. I'll probably put this top 3, top 5, but we'll order it all in the end.
Yep.
Okay. I'll let you take champ pool away.
Okay, so champion pool, my philosophy on this has changed. I believe that champion pool is like the second most important thing in the game right now, because before you can start utilizing anything else, in terms of, let's say, your lane approach, how you want to start optimizing your trades, your kill windows, your itemization, you need to master your champion in order to also start getting better at understanding your base timers. If you don't know how to pilot your champion, you will not know your damage output, you will not know your matchups, and so champion pool, champion mastery, to me, is by far one of the most important things. Yeah.
So I completely agree with you on champ mastery being S tier. We'll get to them later. But for champion pool, I feel like for champ pool, it's not as important. I've heard you say you vouch for one tricking, and I feel like between 1 to 3 champions is optimal. I only think Masters Plus, your champ pool really matters that much. You know, if your champ pool is, let's say, set Volibear, for example, you're going to have a pretty hard time in Masters Plus, right? Unless you're just insane at those champs. So I feel like champion pool for me would be probably D tier, maybe C tier.
Okay, yeah, you're 100% right. I was confused on the champion mastery, champion pool concept here.
We'll put them up there. I agree with you on the champ mastery. We'll put them up.
Champion pool, I agree. I think people also overcomplicate it in regards that the question I get asked the most is, what champion should I main? What champion would be the best on XYZ? Now, there's going to be champions that are objectively better towards the lower MMR, that are worse in higher MMR. For example, champions that can only split push, so like your Alois and your Yorick type champions. But generally speaking, it's not really important what champion you main at the end of the day. If you enjoy a champion, that is generally speaking going to be the best champion to play. And with every champion, you can climb. So champion pool I think is perfect in C tier.
Perfect. All right. So knowing cooldowns. So for this, I mean knowing and how to play around the cooldowns as well. So we'll put in one go. So for example, when you're versing Jax, 17 seconds E. But I feel like you don't need to be too specific. You know, like Darius E 24, Jax E 17. You just need to roughly know when it's up or down. But I'd still put it in probably A or S tier. I'll put A for now, because if you don't know the cooldown roughly, you don't know how to punish them when it's down, or you don't know how to play respectful when it's back up, I feel like you can win or lose a lane and a game off that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you said here. It's so important to understand cooldowns through the lens of your opponent, but also understanding your own cooldowns. So for one thing that I see very commonly with people towards the lower MMRs is that they will not initiate the trade until they have all their cooldowns up. But for example, to take the Jack example, let's say your E is on a 5 seconds cooldown, but your Q is up. You could sometimes already initiate the trade, knowing that during the fight you would get your E back. And this is a concept that a lot of players still struggle with, especially when they're starting off their journey. And understanding on how to punish certain big cooldowns like a Jack's E, Darius E, Fiora W can completely switch a matchup. And if you don't know the cooldowns, sometimes it could feel like you just have no idea how to approach a champion, right? Let's say you're playing against a set, which stat checks you throughout nearly the entire laning phase, and when he E's, it goes on a super long cooldown. If you don't utilize this window, it might feel like you can never approach a set champion. So yeah, knowing your cooldowns is definitely important.
Perfect. How would you say knowing cooldowns, because we're talking in general, for the other roles, how important would you say that is? So, Viego W or Syndra stun, stuff like that, would you say it's at the same level, or they should focus purely on top?
I think on top lane, right, so the cooldown management is going to matter so much more, because I think, interesting. It really depends on the champions that you're going to be versing as well. For example, if you're laning against like a Blitzcrank, right, I think then the high priority of understanding the cooldowns is going to be way higher. But in top lane, whilst you're mainly going to be laning into a 1v1 scenario, especially in an extended lane, it's way more punishing if you get caught off guard by a bad cooldown or you take a bad trade. Whereas in mid lane, I feel like even if you take a bad trade, the worst case scenario is just recall, you lose a few CS. In top lane, it could mean the difference between, okay, I'm going to be a spectator for the next 5 to 10 minutes. I took this bad trade. So in top lane, it matters even more.
Perfect. Would you put an S or A tier then?
Ooh. I still think it's not as...
I'm happy with A, but...
A tier. Yeah, I think A tier for me. Yeah.
Let's lock it in. All right, so for trading, this is what I'd put straight into S tier. It'd be one of my most important. I feel like if you don't know how to trade properly, you're going to miss so many windows to punish your opponent, get solo kills, and really explode the game. Especially this season, the early game is just so important. If you're not trading well, or just, both handshaking and not punishing your opponent when you should, or, worse than that, taking bad trades, you can be the lose condition so often, or just never be the win con. So for me, I'd say this is probably one of the most important, especially in top. Because like you said, for mid, you take a bad trade, it's fine. Just one-shot the wave with your Orianna spell and base. You're going to be chilling, or someone will come help you because you're in the center. But for top, take one bad trade, and the wave's not in a great spot. You can't get that under tower. You're just going to bleed out forever. So I feel like trading has to be maybe even my number one.
Okay, I love that statement. I'm gonna have a different one for the number one, but yeah, trading is extremely important. And of course, there's a lot of things. For example, knowing the cooldowns is gonna facilitate your trading opportunity a lot, right? And trading is definitely going to be your way to expand your lead. Very often, what I also see is if people have no baseline understanding of how to approach trade, for example, taking trades with intention. For example, you're going to take a trade to set up a reset, or take a trade so that you get first access to the plant, or to take equal health trades because you're out-sustaining them. So if you don't know all of these ways with like trading with intention, it's going to be super hard to progress in your laning phase. So I absolutely agree on the Esther placement. Number one, I'm going to try and argue that one later on.
We'll see. All right, how about communication?
Ooh. I would put this in B tier, probably. I think it is important. See, the thing is, some champions, this would probably be S tier. For example, if you're going to play a Shen top. But in the general concept, I would say that in a lot of games, it's going to be even better to full mute than being communicative in general. Yeah. So that is already counterintuitive in that regard then. But yeah, when you have a global ultimate like a Shen, communicating your intention with like, oh, I want to go fight, is going to be super important. The only times where I would say that communicating is very important is when your opponent has lost his summoners and you can communicate that to your jungler to facilitate a plan for him. Other than that, communication is not that important to me.
Yeah, I'd say I want to put it in C tier for the average player. I think, Grandmaster Challenger Plus, comms become really important. But for the average player, I think you just play your own game and get really strong individually. You don't really need to communicate that much. Calling options for your jungler and stuff like that's great. Like you said, calling when they have no flash and pinging 1 minute in advance when it's a free kill, when the wave's coming to. But I'd say it's not, close to being the top priority. So I'd keep it in C tier.
Yeah, maybe even D tier, honestly.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. One thing I do want to clarify. So you said full mute. I do love that strategy. For communication, I believe you only need to ping. Or do you feel like there's some chat as well? Like ward for me, bot? Or
no, only ping.
Right, perfect. Okay, early game roaming. So this is more so for you crash a wave, you can't really hit the tower or anything like that. So you look for a play mid or invade the jungle, especially on a champ like Olaf or Riven, our champs, invading. So I would want to put this in C or B tier, because for the average player, right, the most popular champs like Garen, Mordekaiser, you don't really roam that much. And even if you miss roam windows, it's not the most, the end of the world. So for me, I'd want to put this in C tier for the average player.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think early game roaming has gotten nerfed in the regards that minions wave come out faster and they kill each other faster too as well. So if you look for a roam window, you always have to factor in the risk to reward. And of course, when you can get a roam off, that means that you're not spending your tempo to either recall or to proxy, right? We're gonna get there later, but you're using it for a roam. And very often, the outcome is not guaranteed. There's a risk involved, and if that play goes wrong, and then you also lose the bounce opportunity, it might be very costly even. So I agree that right now, with how the minions wave interact, that early game roaming is something I just don't do too much. So I agree with C. I think
Perfect.
It's good.
Okay, mid game macro. Where would you place this one?
Ooh, I would say S tier.
Esther? All right.
S tier. Well, mid-game macro, it's gonna be dependent on your champion, but for I think mid-game macro and tempo, to me, they kind of are like on a very similar line because they're like brothers, right? They have to really work well together. And so mid-game macro is very important to me because where a lot of people go wrong in mid-game macro is there's so many options, like you can split push, join neutrals. There's so many different things that you can try and play towards. But if you have a good goal setting, and the order of importance that I usually go is I say we gotta play for the natural resource on the map. So that's gonna be side lanes into turrets, so tier 1 turrets, preferably tier 2 turrets, and then side lanes into potential jungle camps or roams, right? But always kind of side lanes first if you can to make sure that you optimize your resource income in the mid to late. What a lot of people do is they group up simply too much as a baseline. And as a result, they don't play to the side lanes, they drop the resources, and if people learn to play sideways to turrets and do that more consistently, keep up their high resource income, and they'll pretty much be way more consistent. So that's how I see it.
I agree with most of your points. I want to put it in A tier, so a slight disagreement, just because I feel like for the average player, if you get really good at a bunch of the main laning concepts we're going to talk about, and how to teamfight and skirmish well, or side laning depending on your champion, you're going to be fine. Knowing, exactly when to side and when to group up, stuff like that, it's really important. But for me, it's just not on the same level as being really good at your champion, trading, and all these other really big things. So for that reason, I would put it in A tier, but probably top of A tier.
I agree with your statement, because I would also say that if your laning phase is better, your mid to late game macro is going to be better.
Yeah.
Always. So
perfect.
I agree.
Way more options. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you touched on tempo as well. So in our program, the way I love to teach tempo is not, tracking jungle support who's got first move, stuff like that. I like to teach it just making your own tempo good. So when the play is done, you base straight away, or you just instantly reset when you've got your item, not wasting any time. Because you've probably seen it a lot. They'll make a great play. They'll push inside, make someone answer, gank mid, but then they'll float around. They'll push the mid wave out, they'll break the tower, they'll waste all this time, and now they're down in tempo, and the enemy team kills their team. So from their point of view, it's like, why is my team getting caught out? I just ganked for them. But you spent an extra minute doing raptors and pushing mid. So I feel like tempo, if you try to simplify it, can be quite important. But you don't need to fully understand, tracking jungle support, anything like that. So for me, I would put it probably A tier.
Okay, this one I feel like has to go into S tier because tempo is good in laning phase 2. For example, understanding your reset timers and proxy farming or opportunities is going to heavily rely on. So tempo is arguably the most important, one of the most important concepts as well, because it ties in with nearly everything, but it's super hard to have all these different branches. So for example, where one of the things that I always like to talk about is whenever you see a jungler on the map, you got to press tab, check their farm, but also check their items. Because if you see, let's say around 4 minutes, that enemy jungler hasn't recalled yet, it's very likely to assume that they have to spend their next 30 seconds first recalling and then getting back on the map again, which gives you an understanding of their tempo. So tempo, through the lens of yourself, I would put an A tier as well. But if you learn to see the game through the lens of your opponent too, tempo becomes arguably the most important concept. So remember, yesterday I had a coaching, and it was a Camille side lane against a Victor. And when he got to the side lane, he saw that Victor was only on 2 components towards his next item, and he had been on the map for like about 4 to 5 minutes. But because he didn't register that Victor's likely intention is going to be to try and recall, he wasted his roam timer to try and roam to mid instead of getting 1 or perhaps even 2 turrets during the timer that he had. And so just understanding these tempo opportunities is going to refine your gameplay so much. But again, it's a very hard concept to master, but in my opinion, one of the most important ones.
All right, I'm happy to put an S tier, but at the back of it, just because it's so hard to master, so I wouldn't want anyone to prioritize that over their champ mastery or their base timing, stuff like that.
Yes, I do agree with you on that, 100%.
Perfect. All right, playing to win condition. So to give an easy example of this, you're playing a game where you're a flanking champ like Aatrox, but you have a 9-0 Jinx. Your win condition's not to flank anymore, it's to keep that girl alive. So I feel like this is going to be important for those really close games that can kind of be the difference maker, because you need about, your goal for the average player should be around 55% win rate, right? 54, 55, they're doing pretty good. So that can be the difference maker in a lot of games. So maybe you're playing a champ that fronts to back, but you've got a 10-0 jungler that's going to dive the backline. You can just follow them up. So kind of playing to the win conditions on your team and the enemy team. I'd put in A or B tier. Probably A tier.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. So very often I would get the question, how do I play out team fights, or how do I team fight in general? And I think you just exactly explained why, or perfectly explained as to pretty much how to do so. It's not going to be a matter of execution. It's going to be a matter of preparation most of the time. So like, what do I play around for? Who is my carry? What summoners, for example, are up? And then playing actively around that instead of just pretty much winging it. And I think one of the best ways to prepare team fights is to play to your win conditions.
Perfect. Okay. What about the situation when you're the win condition? That's just mainly when you fall back to champ mastery, right? So if you're a champ like Fiora, you're Gwen, you mainly play through side, you play a bit more safe actually in a game where you're the win condition, where a lot of people have their reverse, where if you're 7-0 on a champ like Fiora, you're really far ahead, you should actually play a bit safer than if you're 1-5 having a bad game, because you creating pressure and dying for a tier 2 is more important in that type of game than a game where you're the win condition. So I'd say registering when you're the win con as well can be important.
Yeah, 100%. Good touch.
Perfect. All right, runes and items. So I feel like this is gonna be our first big disagreement. I'm excited for this one. This is probably one of my least favorite things that people tunnel on. I feel like as long as your runes and items, I'm just gonna put a D tier for now. As long as your runes and items aren't terrible, it's fine. And for the average player now, 10 years ago, I'd say it's more important, because people were just building some horrible items, but now everyone knows you just go Stridebreaker and Garen, and as long as you're not building something stupid like Lichbane, something out over the top, I don't think runes and items matter that much. As long as your build is decent on your champ and it makes sense, and your items as well, you're going to be fine. It doesn't matter if you went PD when you should have gone Mortal or something like that. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter. Of course, optimizing it does matter, especially at the higher level. But all this stuff is just so much more important that I feel like tunneling 2-item runes and items really hold a lot of people back.
Okay, I find this very interesting. So, yeah. I think this is going to, of course, matter on the champions you play as well. So if you'd say the Garen, the Mordekaiser, the Mundo type champions, I absolutely agree. If you were to play a champion like Jace Riven, this would already surge in terms of priority. All right, we're basically champions where you have multiple options. But in general consensus, in terms of runes, I agree. Itemization, however, I think is a whole other concept. So the thing is, depending on the game state and kind of the win conditions you have in the game, itemization ends up becoming one of the more refined things to do. So what I have noticed quite a lot recently is that I am coaching students that have a position where they are the win condition, or they are the one playing from head, and then so their itemization in those kind of games are going to matter a lot. So kind of one of the main concepts that I always say is, for example, when you are ahead of both the gold and the EXP curve, you should go defensive as offensive, because at that point, if you make sure that you already have enough damage because you're ahead, and then build defensive, you're going to be in a fine spot. If you are going to be 5-0 on Garen and straight away going for full damage, and you get like your Affinity Edge fourth as well, it seems counterintuitive. Now, in some games, this is of course not going to matter, but understanding itemization is also a thing that requires a lot of time, because you need to know what damage output every champion in the game does, right? Who does AD damage, who does physical damage, how do I itemize against true damage? So it also overcomplicated, but D tier on items is bad to me.
All right,
I can agree with.
I'm willing to bump it up just because of your example where champs where it matters a lot more, like Riven. If you just went, Rev Hydra when you should have gone Cleaver, I can see that mattering a lot. So I'm willing to move it up to C tier. but just with the caveat that pretty much everything above it, when we reorder the list, is going to be more important. You're not
Yeah,
going to be losing or stuck because your build is not the best. It's
I
probably going
agree.
to be one of these top dogs up here. So I'm happy with Sita. Give him a little bit of a promotion.
Okay. Maybe
All
I have
right.
a controversial take here. Vision control is one of the things I touch on the least.
Yeah.
I would almost put it in the don't worry tier too much. I think
Yeah.
people overcomplicate vision control. One thing is I barely build pink wards, and I also tell a lot of my students to not buy pink wards. If you have a choice, if you have 75 gold in an early recall, I always tell them to buy a potion to optimize their trading. And the most important concept for vision is understanding where enemy jungle did their first clear 2 wards. And then the second habit is pretty much trying to keep track of where the jungler is going to go next whenever you see him on the map. That is all the vision that you pretty much need in order to be fine. And then you're playing a 1v1 scenario with your top laner. I think vision control is pretty much, it's not that important. I wouldn't focus too much on it.
Yeah, I'm halfway between Don't Worry and D tier. I'll keep it Don't Worry just because there's a lot of stuff they have to worry about here. But I agree.
Yeah.
As long as you're not just sitting on 2 out of 2 wards the whole game, like you're putting them down in a decent spot, it's not going to be the difference maker a lot of the time.
Yep.
Yeah, and especially a lot of top laners just swap to sweeper in the mid game anyway, so you don't have to worry. Just rock up, cheese a bush with your sweeper, and you're fine. Just try to simplify it.
Yep.
Okay, level up time is probably S tier for me. I think this is just the main way that you win trades really hard or get solo kills in lane. And even now, people still really struggle to pre-move on the level up as well. So not waiting for your level 2, right? Moving when the 7th minion's gonna die during your trade or during your Garen spin or something like that. So for me, I'll put an S tier. I feel like it's the main way that you get a huge advantage in lane.
Yeah. If I'm coaching a new student, if I'm coaching an iron or a bronze student, and they have worked on, we'll get there in a bit, their most important fundamental in my eyes, and their champion mastery. The champion mastery. The next thing that I tell them to focus on is the baseline of the first fundamental is the level up timers. And the reason I put so high emphasis on level up timers is because it's consistent every game and completely in your control. And you can basically in 2 weeks you can memorize all the level up timers, and then you can start seeing it through your lens. But then once you are familiar with the timers, you can also see it from your opponent. So once you see when he levels up and when you level up clearly, you can go for so much more trade opportunities yourself or avoid certain trades that he could do. And this will refine your gameplay a lot already and give you a lot more trade opportunity, especially like you say, when you're walking up, when you're getting a level up, or you're intentionally keeping your cooldowns to sync them with the level up so that you can have 2 abilities ready or even 3 on the level 2 or level 3 timer. So level up timers to me is the fundamental that I would explain first once you have champion mastery and the most important one mastered in my view.
Yeah, perfect. I love the point that you brought up, the syncing your abilities with your level up. If you're level 4, 1 minion off 5, and you use your spells then, you're not going to get that opportunity that you want. Even a lot of people tunnel on when they do get good at level ups, they only use 2, 3, and 6. I don't know if you've seen that as well. But even if you're level 7 versus 6, 9 versus 8, it's such a huge amount of stats. Was it like 500, 600 gold?
Exactly.
So you want to be using every level up that you can. Okay, let's see. CSing. All right. Where would you place this one?
Number 1.
Number 1,
So,
all right.
what I always say, so I've changed my mind on this quite a bit, but the thing is, what I've noticed is that people, and especially towards lower numbers, some of the champions that you see the most is Darius, Set, Mordekaiser, these type of champions. I tell my students right now, if you learn to last it properly, you will always be in a good spot, because the gold income in the game is always going to be, so the best way to get gold in the game is going to be through minions. Gold and XP are the most important stats. And I would say right now, if you watch like Karate Kid, and you have like where he has to do the wax on, wax off, that's last hitting. That's your foundation as a solo laner. If you last it properly, you will, as without taking anything else into consideration, at least be in even spot by just lasting properly when the wave's under your turret, when the wave is getting pushed towards you. Of course, there's going to be so many other different things to worry about, but last hitting is the thing that just happens every game. And what I love the most about it is that it's entirely 100% in your own control. Nobody else impacts that. CSing is in your... If you lose CS, it's your fault. Nobody else. Make sure to get your cannon means too. And so, CSing, in my opinion, is foundation number 1 into champion mastery, and then from there, everything expands.
Interesting. All right. So for me, I'd put it in A tier. The reason for that is I feel like for top lane, I think AD carry mids can get away with it more. For top lane, it's not possible to get every CS, or the majority of it, without sacrificing your trading in some way. And especially at the higher level, so I agree, I'd say especially below Emerald, CSing is really, really important. But at the higher level, I feel like trading can make it so you're not going to be able to CS well in the future. If you get all your farm from the first 3 waves where you lose all the trades, now you're screwed. You might even get zoned XP or you might die. And experience is way more important than the last hit itself. So as long as you're getting all the XP and winning your trades, even if you miss 2 minions a wave, I feel like you're going to be in a better spot, and it's going to be more likely that you solo kill them, make them lose XP. And even if you have 80 minions at 12 minutes, which is not great, if you've killed your opponent a couple of times and you're up a level or 2, you're going to be in a much better position than if you went kind of even or lost trades and got denied XP or had to base, stuff like that. So I feel like in an ideal world, you can do both. But if you're versus a similar skill opponent, or if you're in a bad matchup or something like that, like a really volatile lane, especially in a volatile lane. I agree with you in some cases. If you're playing versus Tom Kench or some meatball like Gragas, just get perfect farm. Just don't touch him. But if you're playing a really volatile Jax vs Fiora type matchup, you really want to be prioritizing the trading and just pick up the minions that you can. If you walk up and get 2 creeps but lose that trade, your lane can be over, which means you can't farm in the future. So I feel like CSing can be important, but for me, I want to put it A tier, just because you can lose your lane by tunneling on it too hard and sacrificing your trading, or just miss a lot of opportunities to shit on them with trading.
Yeah, it's super hard to have this nuance or to have this balanced scenario, because you're going to have the lens to kind of the higher elo and the lower elo intention. So the thing is, what I've seen, for example, is, and the greatest example was, I was coaching a Volibear player, and so this guy was prioritizing trading too much. In fact, he was only trading and only fighting, and he tried to kill his opponent permanently. So he's playing through the lens of kill mentality, which is very often going to be a result of playing around trading as well, right? So instead of kind of seeing the lens through XP income, you're going to see the game through kill income. So you kind of have the balance between those two. And so what I told him is but he was actually laning against the Maokai, so the meatball you were talking about. I told him, stop trying to kill him permanently. Instead, push in the wave, start taking his plates, and proxy farm. 1 week later, he had the exact same matchup. He had 70 CS at minute 10, or the one before. At that point, he had like 90 and 2 plates, and he ended up having about 10 CS per minute at minute 13, and pretty much destroying his opponent. So the thing is, it's so hard because it's going to be matchup-oriented, champion-oriented, and through the lens of like, lower and more higher. These two are so hard to balance, but they're super intertwined as well. It's so hard to find this, but CSing on A tier, to me, is the biggest thing for me is that I have to teach so many students to not have that kill mentality as a baseline and look through the lens of getting gold income through farming, because you can get elite always by playing wave states. And another great example that I have with this is, for example, when you're playing, I'm just going to use Alois as an example. What I see very often is that people play these super strong champions, and instead of using that strong champion to play with wave states, they are going to try and permanently force trades instead, even though their opponents are not having any intentions of walking up for last hits and stuff like this. And so I just think people get too kill hungry, and then that's the issue.
Okay, I can agree. There's kind of two ways around it. It is mainly matchup dependent as well, I'd say. Like that example you gave is perfect, Volibear versus Maokai. That's perfect feedback to give. Like, stop trying to kill that guy, just get perfect farm. But if that guy, the very next game versus Darius, your feedback would be completely different, because you have to prioritize the trading there or you're going to get shit on. So I feel like we'll keep it in S tier. Putting it left to right is going to be really hard as a general concept, because it's very dependent on champion and even bracket. So we'll just keep it, maybe S tier for now and see what we do at the end.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Void Grub intensity. So I put this one in because I feel like, especially this season, they did just nerf it, but Grubs are pretty broken, and they seem to be contested almost every game. Especially in, I'd say, Diamond Plus, the supports will always be there. And I've seen in lower brackets a lot, both supports rock up jungle. So being very aware of playing for it, getting prio for it, you're not freezing on the Grub timer, and also making sure you don't get ganked before it. Because I see it very common where Grubs are up in about 20 seconds. The jungler, of course, wrapped his golems into Void Grubs, but they just gank you. You're a free kill at the end of it. So Grub intensity, factoring in all of those, I'd put it in B tier.
B tier is perfect. One thing I will say though is what I've seen a lot is that people, especially let's say they kill enemy top laner, and they have 2 options: a reset timer or the Void Grubs.
Yeah.
I think people also put too high emphasis on securing the Void Grubs and not understanding their tempo well enough that they should perhaps take their reset. So I think Void Grubs are extremely important, but not worth losing your lane for, kind of, or throwing the game about, because I feel like I've seen that so often too.
Yep.
So that's one thing to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, if there's one big thing you take away from us for Void Grubs, your back timer, there's a reason it's way higher. You can't miss your back timer for it. Alright, so tracking mid. Where would you put this one?
Don't worry.
Don't worry, yeah.
Yeah. And that is just because it is so inconsistent to keep track of all the other factors and then factoring where the mid laner is going to be at as well. Tracking the jungler, extremely important. Tracking the mid laner, very tough to do unless they are playing like a Nunu Akshan mid lane. Maybe then your priority should rise. But in the general sense, as a baseline concept, I wouldn't care too much about mid lane roams.
Yeah, I agree. Tracking the mid laner for me comes kind of from champ select. Like you said, oh, they have Talon or Nunu. I'm going to get ganked top. So you have to play differently just from the get-go. So I feel like, but for the average mid, if you're versing Syndra or Orianna, who cares? You might get ganked some games, but there's way more important things for you to focus on. Okay, wave control, I think we'll both agree straight to S tier for this one.
Yeah.
I think this season, it's actually way less important. I probably would have had a top 3, top 2. It's still important, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot easier now. Back then, we kind of had it easy. It was so easy to let the wave come back into you after crashing a wave freeze and just zone them forever if you're strong, your champion's stronger. But now if you even, breathe on them a little bit, the wave breaks. But it's still important to know like when to 2-wave, 3-wave, when to actually let it come back and freeze to not inch your team. So I think there's still a lot that goes into it, especially because good wave control will give you good back timings as well. So for me, yeah, they're best buddies. So I'll keep them up in S tier.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the one biggest skill that people need to learn with wave control is being able to kind of play with a wave ahead. So the thing is, everything in top lane is kind of based on turns, and the turn is always going to be a wave. So if you can learn to think 1 or sometimes even 2 waves ahead, both in gold and resources, that will set up your base timers, that will give you good tempo, and so that will give you also trading intention, right? So everything spans from playing pretty much on those wave states. A great example that I can always give is that, for example, if you have wave control at minute 6, if you get priority on that wave and you trade, so kind of hand in hand, you get access to the plant and the river, just as a baseline concept. But yeah, wave control is for sure one of the most important things to understand.
Perfect. All right, team fighting. I'm curious where you'd put this one. I feel like this season the value's up a lot, but what do you take?
I would put this personally. So I think team fighting is important as a concept, but I think what's more important is learning how to set up the team fights, so playing to win conditions, and understanding your tempo. So I'd actually put this maybe in C or D tier. And I think, again, that team fighting is very important, but so I rarely go into a coaching session, I'm like, I'm going to break down how you played this team fight on a mechanical level, because it's very hard to say like, oh, next game, oh, you should have dodged this ability, man. Like, what did you do here? But what's most important is that you play the team fight, not necessarily in front of you, like before it happens, but mostly what is going to be your intention? Are you going to be there in time? Are you going to be in a good position? And are you playing to your win condition more so than anything else?
So I actually have a different take. I'd want to put it in A, so I'll keep it in B. We'll meet in the middle. Reason for that, like the positioning that you talked about, for me, that's part of team fighting. So knowing when to flank or front to back, stuff like that. But I feel like I've seen it so often. So perfect example from today, I actually had 2 Urgot students, and every time they smelled a fight going on, they instantly eat in. And you know how bad that can be. You need to hold your spells, approach with movement, try to chain it off a Q or even an ulti slow, and then use your E when it's going to hit or after they flash, stuff like that. So if you're bad at team fighting, even if you're fire ahead and win your lane, if you use your abilities at the wrong time, especially on certain champions, like I'd say Camille, as the champion that I've coached the most, that people really struggle with team fighting on her, because you have to be the king of holding abilities. If you E in, you're Ignite Camille, you're just stuck there. You're a free kill. You're a champion with engaged with no tankiness until later on. So you're just going to die instantly if you E in. So I feel like that happens so much, especially Urgot players, Camille, Jax players just queuing in. And even if you're 4 or you win lane, if you just jump in and tank all their CC, you're not sitting there threatening the flank, waiting for those major spells to be used, you can just lose the game off it so easily. So for me, I'd want to put it in A tier. But
no, I agree. I agree with A tier, actually.
Okay.
And so this is also because So again, the examples you've mentioned are actually beautiful, and I absolutely agree. But then you're also gonna have like your Alois, Yorick type
Yeah.
champions that just never care about team fighting. But as a base concept, I agree that team fighting should be an A because it's still super important to know what your champion kind of has to do in a team fight scenario, right?
Yep, great point. Yeah,
So
if you
I
play
absolutely
champs like
agree.
if you play champs like Trundle, Yorick, don't worry about it. You can put in don't worry. But
Yeah, pretty
I
much.
think for common champs like Darius, you need to know your identity, stuff like that. Okay,
Yeah,
let's see. All right, mental fortitude. I would
S
put
tier for
this
me.
one S tier.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to go A tier. I feel like it is important for sure, especially in those close games that you could have won. But maybe I'm thinking it the wrong way. I'd rather have that guy on your team that's tilted, but he's really good at all these things above.
Oh,
Than,
okay.
than but yeah,
What do
mental
you
fortitude.
mean
Mental
with mental
fortitude.
fortitude? Yeah.
Yeah, so trying hard in the game, no matter what happens, I'd say is how I'd classify it. And it is important. But if you're trying hard, but the reason I think it's not S tier is just because if you're trying hard, but you're not good at CSing, level, all these things that are more important than it, I feel like it doesn't matter as much as the things above it on the list. I'd put it top of A tier probably because it is important. But if you're trying, like if you're a great mentality and you're trying hard, but you're not that good at getting leads in lane or team fighting, level up timers, any of that, I feel like those things are just more important.
Okay.
Unless it's
Here's
unless it's extreme.
yeah.
Unless you're just like mega into selling your items.
Yeah, okay, that of course is the extreme
Yeah.
scenario. But what I will say, what I've noticed is that from your emotional, I guess, perspective before heading into the game, lots of your decisions are going to be based on that as well. So, for example, if your mental is good before heading into the game, you'll be way more disciplined with the trades that you're going to be taking. You're going to be a lot less emotional. You're going to be playing more risk averse in the scenarios where you have to. You'll be way more inclined to go and open up on the correct side waves. And so all the decisions that you make in the game, in my perspective, are all going to be a direct result of what your mentality is before heading into the game. And so if you have a bad mentality or like you are tilted or you are emotional, I would actually tell people always to take a break because otherwise you might even be giving yourself bad practice. You're going to teach yourself bad habits. So if your mentality is bad, I feel like at least 50% of your decisions in that game are going to be a direct result of you having a bad mentality. That's why I put that mentality perhaps even as number one before anything else. Because if your mental is bad, you're going to make bad decisions by default.
Okay, I'm happy to put in S tier because of the point you touched on. If you're playing a block of games, if you're playing 5-6 games in a row and game 2 tilted you because your jungler was trying his best but not playing too well, then
Yeah.
you're gonna really struggle. So yeah, I can definitely see, especially if you play a full day of games, that could be number one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Map awareness. So this is more of a general one. So we've got jungle tracking and stuff, but in terms of general map awareness, I'd have to put it A tier. Close to S tier. I feel like the reason I don't want to put it in S is because if you're really good at laning and all that stuff, which most of this is based on laning and backtime and stuff like that, great at your champion. Map awareness is important. You'll die to more ganks and stuff, but I feel like these are just more important. They're on another level to map awareness.
Yep. I have nothing to touch upon that. I think it's absolutely perfect. I think the
Perfect.
biggest thing that you have to be aware as a top laner is going to be the jungler. And later on, of course, that will change depending on when you should be able to push a tier 2 to a yes or no. But still, if your laning phase is better, I mean, good luck. You can just 2v1 them later on. So
Yep.
I agree. This should be an A tier.
All right. Summoner spells.
Okay, is this going to be like the summoners that you select in the game? Or like the
So
tracking?
when you should take TP over Ignite on Riven or Exhaust on Gwen or something like that. Ghost versus Ignite on Gwen, for example.
I would put this... Okay, so in high elo, this is, in my opinion, S tier. In the general idea, I would put it around B tier. Because if you're going to run... So my general philosophy between Ignite and Teleport is exactly as follows. If you are able to control the wave state or get priority level 1 in a matchup, running Ignite is pretty much always fine. If you're unable to ever get wave control, especially early on, you should run Teleport because it's like a get out of jail free card, and if you don't have that, you will by default fall behind because you're gonna have to take a reset whilst you're getting pushed in. And remember, we want to take a reset when the wave is pushing away from us. Oh, sorry, when the wave is pushing back towards us, not when it's pushing away from us. That's the worst case scenario. So because of that, some response is important, but theory and execution in most elo brackets are not going to be similar. And so as a result, I don't think it's as important as the other things at all.
Yep, completely agree. I like your point on high elo being more important. Even Olaf players take barrier in some matchups and stuff like that. You can really min-max it. So, but for the average player, maybe C tier. So I'm happy with B tier as kind of that middle ground.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Matchup knowledge. So I want to put this in S tier personally. Maybe A tier. I'm gonna keep it here for now. We can move it up. The reason I'm on the fence is because if you're extremely good at your champ mastery, a lot of champions actually have patterns. So recently I did reviews on the best Warwick guy, the guy that took us out, both of us out, and the best Volibear guy. And they do something similar pretty much every game. Of course, not exactly the same, but they've got patterns that they can follow. So of course they know their matchups too. But if you're really good at your certain champion mastery, you can do patterns and do well most of the time. You know what's going to work in the majority of your games. But there are a lot of champions where you need matchup knowledge. So I talked a bit about with you yesterday, Jax. You really need to know when to lead with movement, Q, when to lead with E, when to hold E. It's like so many different little details that are very matchup specific. So for me, it's pretty champion dependent. So A or S tier.
I agree. I don't think it's as important as champion mastery.
Yeah.
But matchup knowledge is one of the most important criteria for champion mastery. So, for example, if I tell people on how to play Riven, you gotta have to learn your combos. You're gonna have to learn your itemizations. You're gonna have to learn how to play around your cooldowns. And one of the most important criteria is also going to be learning your matchups. But it's not as important as, for example, using your level up timers correctly. Those kind of patterns that you can utilize every single time. And so it's very important, but not ultra important, I would say.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, champ select. So what I mean by champ select here is pretty much knowing the best champion to pick in the right spot. So it ties into champ pool, but you can have a good champ pool but not know when to pick the right champ, right? So for me, I'd probably put this in don't worry or D.
Yeah. I put don't worry.
Yeah.
If you are super high low, again, this would be important. But especially when we have champion pool in C tier, if champion pool doesn't matter that much, and again, if we generally speaking would recommend, if you want to climb as fast as possible by default, it's better to be a one trick. Because the faster you can get champion mastery, the faster you can start utilizing your trade windows, your tempo, your base timers, right? So that's why champion mastery kind of goes first, because once you understand how to play your champion, you can learn how to trade properly with them. You can learn how to do everything else, and then champions like knowing when to pick the correct champion is actually in a don't worry tier. And I think it's super important to emphasize on this, because so often, I think one of the most common questions I get asked is about champion pool. But people overcomplicate how important the champion pool is. I would say pretty much as a baseline below Masters, you could climb with pretty much playing anything in top lane. Any style works.
Yep.
Although I would stay away from tanks and ranged top lane champions. Preferably, they can still work. So I don't think champion matters in champ select matters that much.
One thing I'm curious about, where would you put champ select for only high-elo, so Master Plus?
Unironically, S tier.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Too many games are ruined. You've probably had games where you pick Riven and then you've got Graves, Pike or something. It's just unplayable.
Exactly. And if people don't use the swap order correctly, right? Yeah. So let's say a top laner has to first pick, blind pick something, and then the whole draft is good. Very often, from a draft perspective, you can already kind of guess who's going to win the game or not.
Yeah.
Or at least give them favors. Maybe one more thing I want to touch on champion select, especially catered to the lower MMR, is a point I made earlier that execution and theory is not always going to be the same. So even though you might be playing a theoretic bad matchup, let's say you're playing Garen to Teemo. If you've played that matchup 20 times before already, it's not going to matter that you are playing a pretty much bad matchup, because you're gaining experience through the lens of having your champion pool small. And even things like full 80 comps, they are annoying, but if they don't have something to pretty much counteract that, it doesn't matter as much. And with champions like understanding as well, you need to understand every champion in the game to know when to pick what. So I just wouldn't worry about it.
Perfect. I like that point as well. I feel like for any player in lower MMRs, below Emerald, it's better to have a full AD comp than to play a champion not that good at.
Yeah,
100%.
Actually, I agree.
All right, Sidelaning.
Ooh.
This one's tough for me. I would say it's pretty champ dependent as well. I'd say generally for top lane, probably B or A tier.
Yeah.
I'll keep it B tier for now. Reasoning for that is it's pretty unrealistic a lot of the time in higher ranks to break tier 2s without resistance. Emerald, below Emerald, you can get tier 2s quite easily, so sidelaning actually is way more important there. where in higher ranks you pretty much push out a wave and start moving before you see them answer, because you know they're going to. You know they're going to answer it, or you know jungle support's going to gank you if you go one more, so you're already moving and looking for a play. But in lower MMRs, they waste a lot of time and they make a lot of random plays, so you can kind of collect tier 2s, or you can just get so far ahead you can just break it in front of them. So I would say for Emerald below players, I'd put it in A tier for you, but on average, probably B tier.
Yeah, I think you've made absolutely great points, but I think for high-low, I would still consider it A tier, and that's because the baseline concept, and this is something that that doesn't click for everybody. So in laning phase, people know that very often you should slow push into hard push, and that will make the wave push back towards you as a baseline concept. What a lot of people forget is that side wave management is as important as wave management in the laning phase. All the resources you get in mid to late are, from a solo lane perspective, going to be from the side lanes. So managing your side wave effectively as well and efficiently by making sure you get its aggression to tier 2, making it push back towards you, and then perhaps with the downtime get roam timers or from jungle camps is the best way to gain resource income. Now, for a champion like Shen or Tahm Kench, this matters a lot less. But for so many top lane champions, this is their way to pretty much get consistent in the game. So through the lens of resource income, I think sidelaning is very important. And so my opinion would actually be to try and put it maybe even into S tier in certain scenarios, but I think A tier is a perfect balance then.
Yep, I'm happy with A. I agree, you still want to be... I still value it a lot in terms of using it, but winning the game through side, I feel like is a lot harder in the higher brackets.
Absolutely.
Okay, tracking support. So where do you think this one should go?
I would say, again, I mean, it's D or don't worry. I'd say maybe D tier, because tracking support is super important around the grub timing, specifically, right? But generally speaking, supports rarely lane gank. I can say there's 3 people in the EU solo queue ladder that have like the tendency as supports to roam to top, but so many support players, especially when they're playing enchanters, you'll never really find them top lane. And so I just think it's in the don't worry tier, because else you're gonna overcomplicate things and perhaps try to... You don't see a support in the map, you're gonna start panicking when 99% of the time they're going either mid or back to bot.
Yep, 100%. It's just too much of a mental stack as well to keep in mind. There's way too much you need to think about as a top laner to be tracking support. So I'm happy with don't worry. Okay, tracking jungle. This one's tough. I would put it probably in B tier. So for me, the way I like to teach tracking jungle is not like, all right, he's done these camps and stuff like that, right? I feel like that's too hard for the average player to track, like, this is his route, he can be at this timer. You kind of just need to know where he's not, which I guess I'm going to put it actually up to A tier, because that does count as jungle tracking. But if you see your jungler do dragon or gank bot or eat a bot camp and their jungler's not there, he's top. Like, more often than not, he's top. If he hasn't even popped his head in, he's looking to gank you really closely. So I think if you can just get to at least that level, you don't need to know perfectly where he's going. His Grump's up in 20, he's going to be there, stuff like that. If you just know where he's not, I feel like that's more than enough, but I would count that as jungle tracking, so I'll keep it in there.
So what you kind of said there is you briefly touched upon the strong side, weak side concept there. I feel like these are very hand in hand, because when we're tracking the jungler, we're pretty much tracking if we're currently strong side or weak side. They kind of go hand in hand in that regard, and I absolutely agree. Now, the thing is, I think tracking the jungler, in my opinion, is actually also going to be, again, dependent kind of on the state of your game, but I would put it S tier for this reason. In the early laning phase, level 1 to level 4, you're playing your wave states, first of all, especially in the early levels, around your matchup, but second of all, around the jungle tracking. Both top laners, realistically, should be playing their wave state according to how the junglers are pathing. So if you're playing in a weak side position, you're going to have to play different than when you're in a strong side position. But again, that makes it that they're going to go hand in hand. Now, the thing is, if you are playing just normal through the lens of the 1v1 scope, you get priority, and you are not taking into consideration where the enemy jungle started, and you die, I would say very often your game ends right there, literally. Because for the next 10 minutes in the game, you're going to be a spectator because of one mistake that you made. And that snowballs completely out of control, because you're going to have to get back to a bad wave stage, you're behind in golden XP. So I would say that jungle tracking, or at least understanding the first clear of the jungles, to me is the thing I usually like to teach second after level timers. Because if you understand the first jungle clear, and understand their potential gank timers, it will open you up to learn how to play around the second wave crash, a third wave crash, perhaps proxy farming. So I actually think that jungle tracking, to me, is S tier.
Okay, so there's one variable I want you to think about before you place it. I would say from a jungle point of view, there's no lane harder to gank than a top laner that's completely smashing their lane. So if you've got really good wave control, your trading is on point, it's really hard to gank. You know, certain champions, of course, but if you're having a great game on, let's say, Renekton, Mordekaiser, Darius, and you're really playing well in your lane, you barely even need to know where the jungler is. You need to have a rough idea, but it's really hard for, I think top lane is really hard to gank if you're really doing well in your lane. Of course, if they have a 3-0 jungle with one item at 9 minutes, you're just going to die, but I'd say on average, if you just play your lane, you know, all the things in S tier very well, or the most of them, it's hard for the jungle to punish you.
I see your point, especially through that lens. But I would also say that the way that you are gonna be controlling your wave, or the way that you are going to be trading, has to factor in the junglers as well. You can't play top lane through the lens of a complete 1v1, especially if you're potentially on the weak side. So because you always have to think about the jungler, I feel like it ties in with everything, but then perhaps A is the safe, or better say the balanced position, because still, more often than not, you're still playing a 1v1 scenario.
I'm maybe with this, yeah, because
Yeah.
a point you brought up as well, the first clear, you're not going to 1v2 on the first clear. It's not going to happen, even if you're trading well. So I'm happy with Esther.
Yeah.
I think for the first 5 minutes, Esther, and then for the rest of it, doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, 100%. 100% agree.
Okay, let's see. Weak side, strong side, so pretty much the same thing. I feel like I'll just put it in A tier. So just to try differentiate it, it's playing your weak side like really well, like getting as much as you can without dying. Because anyone can play weak side. You just sit under your tower and don't die, or give up the tower if you have to. But it's knowing that line, knowing that line of where you can stand without getting punished, or strong side, like knowing how to really, my jungler's here, I can play like a complete psycho, I can do losing trades, but it's good for me. I feel like it's important, but not S tier level.
No, I would perhaps even in that regard put it in, perhaps in B tier then, because the thing is you have to min-max it so hard, and you gotta be, so first things first, you gotta be wary of strong side, weak side then, and it's like it's a mentality switch that you go. So then perhaps in the first 4 waves, this is way more important, right? But then pretty much afterwards, it's gonna be way harder to try and utilize this, unless maybe your jungler is doing drag and they get a global notification, enemy jungler is doing grubs, then, I mean, you're weak-sided, but in the general, like as a general concept, I think it's going to be pretty hard for players to try and optimize the way they play strong side and weak side. And as a baseline concept, I usually tell them, if you're weak side, going even is doing your job. And if you're strong side, you should try and look for those equal health traits or even some negative traits, because you have your jungler around you. But optimizing that is not as important as just, you know, playing good around your wave state, training well, these kind of things. So I'd say it's important, but not super important. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, spacing. Where would you put this one?
Ooh, I'm actually very curious on yours. I feel like this is so spacing is one of the things that I pretty much never touch on, or rarely touch on, in my coaching, because I feel like it's such a hard thing to teach people. The only thing I pretty much talk about when spacing is, for example, the intention of staying on your last. So when I tell, the only thing I pretty much say about spacing is, if your opponent, when is your opponent going to walk up in general, it's going to be for last hits. That's, for example, when you can punish.
Yep.
Or if you are about to get your level up timer, you should, for example, hit the mean in a more aggressive manner, or in a posture where you're pushed up, so that you can potentially look for trades. But other than that, I think spacing is super hard to explain as a concept. But I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, for high elo, I'd actually put it S tier.
Yeah.
Something that really opened my eyes is a couple of weeks back I versed Zika, and he played Ambessa top, and he was just, I was Olaf, he was just spacing me every single ability, his auto attack range, everything. It felt like he was playing like a range like Caitlyn or something. You just can't touch him at all. So when it gets to that level, I feel like it's really important. And mid laners are really good at this, which is why he, you know, ran me over. But for the average player, it's just not something you really, I'd almost put it in don't worry, but if we count spacing as what you talked about, like if you touch this minion, I'm going to trade onto you, like you're spacing in a way to punish that, then probably C tier or B tier.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, like with spacing, what's so important is it's gonna matter on the champion you play as well. If you're playing Mordekaiser, spacing doesn't matter that much. If you're playing Gwen, your entire champion relies on spacing as well. So it's super hard to, I guess, with some of these concepts, it's hard to balance. I think C is absolutely perfect.
Nice. All right, proxying. So this one's pretty champ specific. Probably like 80-70% of the champs can't proxy, at least until first item. But I'll probably put it in B tier. It depends on your champ though. If you play champs like Garen and stuff, probably S tier or A tier. But I'm gonna put it in B tier for now. Proxying is also one of the most OP things about it is it's a big way for you to impact the game early game. So of course the high tempo recall is a huge bonus. If you proxy before you base, you won't miss anything. You don't have to TP back to lane. That's a really big bonus if you can do that. But being able to be in a game where, oh, I'm versus a Maokai 0-2, I don't want to beat him up anymore, and you just proxy, eat golems, proxy, attack jungle, proxy, attack mid, that's how you can really carry a game as top lane, where most of the time you're stuck in an island and you can't really interact with anyone until plates fall off. So I feel like that can be really important, but it is very champ specific.
You've pretty much touched on all the points that I've made. So I feel like sometimes proxying is going to be S tier, especially in those matches where you can progress. And you're pretty much like when you're playing against a neutralizer, one of the best ways to still get a lead in tempo and expanding your resource is going to be through proxying, because you don't have to kill your opponent. You can just farm the wave, take their plates when the wave gets on the turret, and kind of expand your lead that way. But there's also so many downsides to a proxy farm, because if you do it wrong, you die to the jungler. You need to have a lot of other things played in mind there. You got to be tracking the jungler properly. You got to make sure that you are you can get chased by your opponent. So if done well as a concept, it is extremely good, but it's pretty hard to do, and not every champion can do it. So I think B is a fair thing, but with the mind that sometimes it's going to be absolutely S tier, depending again on the champion that you play. I think it's perfect.
100%. And in some champions, you'll be D tier. Some champions, you can't proxy at all. Yeah.
Good luck proxying a Shen and Tahm Kench, guys.
Yeah, impossible.
It's fun. Alright guys, so we've ordered the importance of fundamentals right now. Because me and Chippys are a little bit mixed on the top 3, the left to right doesn't matter, they are equally important. We're very inclusive here, but starting from S tier, everything is pretty much ranked from left to right in terms of importance, and the only thing that we have demoted in hindsight is going to be the early game roaming. We think this is a matter that is like so little importance that we've rated from C to D. Other than that, is there anything in specific you'd like to touch upon?
No, I think we covered a lot here. I appreciate you joining me, and hopefully the people watching, they know it's a general list. So you might already be good at level up timers, so it's not going to be a top priority for you. So it's just important for you to think about where you're lacking, and then if there's 2 or 3 things that come up, you can check this tier list and kind of prioritize it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great touch, because what I would do right now, if I'm in your shoes right now, is basically make this a checklist. So you're like, okay, all right, I want to start learning to play top lane better. I'm going to lock in my champion mastery. Again, 1 to 3 champions. I'm going to work on trading and CSing pretty much at the same time as in terms of importance. And then, all right, how do I start improving from this point onwards? Okay, I got to work on my base timers, my level up timers, the way I control my base. Of course, these are very broad concepts that you have to start utilizing and start applying into your gameplays. But again, I would literally look at it through the lens of this top 3 most important, and then you go down the list in terms of the content that you start working on, and then you'll be a complete top laner.
All right, perfect. Wrap it up there.